I guess with this being probably mine. Well, good evening, everyone. So I'm filling in tonight in lieu of the pastor being out to daughter's graduation. You know, it's not 4 years, right? How many years has that been? I thought, man, she must have went through the speed course or something, because it seemed like it was like 2 years since she's been gone. And so they're there for that graduation and be back hopefully Sunday. So just a warning, Dave. Remember the pastor said somebody better be ready Sunday morning? In case his airline doesn't make it in. Just to give you a heads up, I may not be here either. And Dan said he did announcements last week, so he's covered there. So, so somebody be ready to fill in Sunday morning. So we want to open with any prayer requests anybody may have. Yeah, I guess if we don't have any, we're going to get right into this. So there's absolutely no way that I can stand up here and speak for an hour. I mean, unless you want me to talk about tires, I can actually do that, but not. 30 minutes is good for me in talking about the Bible, which is a whole nother subject. You know, I mean, that's something else we should be able to converse freely in, is being able to speak about what we believe and why we believe what we believe. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about tonight is, is why do you believe what you believe? So my scripture reference is John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In verse 2, He was with God in the beginning. So why do we believe what we believe? Why do I believe those verses? I was raised in this church. Funny, I could actually show you the Sunday school records in 1955 in October when they added one little baby to the nursery, and that was me. Just for giggles, I happened to find the enrollment books back in the back room back here in the basement, and found the first book, and found where I was added into the enrollment I think I was added like the third week of October, 1955. So I was raised in the church. My parents made sure I was here just about every time the doors were open. I had really good grandparents that were excellent role models. Several teachers that I can recall over the years, Sunday school teachers I had, that were all significant, important people in my life that gave me good biblical understanding. And so at about the age of 10, I became a Christian. I accepted Christ. I was baptized. I was never challenged. I never questioned what I believed or why I believed what I believed. And kids I grew up with, they knew who I was, what I believed. They never questioned me. Rarely would anybody ask me anything. It was usually a non-believer friend would just have a curious question about something, and I would just casually tell them what I thought. But was never challenged in anything that I believed. I went away to college, and the college I went to, there was nobody from Bonners Ferry in the college that I went to. In fact, nobody from Idaho was even in the college I went to. So everybody there was new. And it wasn't long before I was questioned about what I believe, why I believe what I believe. And very few people that I ran into in college believed what I believed. So actually it was questioned. So I began to question, why is it? Why do I believe what I believe? I mean, should I just take my parents' word for it? Should I take my grandparents' word for it and all these Sunday school teachers? And my answer was, no, I shouldn't do that. It's the same thing I told some missionaries that came to my house last fall. And I immediately told them what I believed. And, it was a 5-minute testimony. And then I challenged them. I asked, well, why do you believe what you believe? And they same answer I had when I was young. Well, I grew up in the church. My parents taught me this. My grandparents taught me that. And so I believe what they taught me. And I said, well, what you believe is pretty significant for history in the world. There should be some evidence in what you believe. What's your evidence? And they had no evidence to back up what they believe. And there's got to be some more evidence besides just something that your parents told you or something that's written down. If it's something that's so significant, such as what we believe in the Bible. So because of that, we find a lot of young people walking away from the church. And you can even think, even preachers' kids are walking away from the church because they don't know why they believe what they believe. And I think we've really failed our young people over the years in not giving them the real evidence that they can use themselves when they question what they believe, why they believe what they believe. And so while I was by myself in college, I began to question this. And so I began, besides what I had to do in my normal studies, I began to just try to find some science books, whatever I could find, that might substantiate what I believe. Because my question was the science part of it. It wasn't that, it wasn't archaeological, because there's a lot of archaeological proof that'll substantiate the Bible. Even secular archaeologists use the Bible as a reference when they're doing work. And they find stuff all the time, even recently they find stuff that supports the Bible. Again, the historical proof, there's even proof there. Human nature, when you read the Bible, you find that the Bible records even the bad and the ugly that good God believers did. And a normal book, you wouldn't record those bad things if you were just making something up. And then you have thousands of Christians in the early church that were drug away from their families and businesses and killed because of what they believe. That's pretty substantial. So I began to try to find the science behind it, and finally come across a book in the library at college where a professor was writing about the cell. And without a cell, you're not going to have life. And the details and everything and what it takes to make up a cell, and how they are trying to make this living cell, and some scientists even claim that they actually did make a living cell. And but when you really study the cell and what it's made of, you can see the impossibility of even billions and billions of years in a mud pit or in a cave or in the bottom of the ocean, how these chemicals would come together and naturally form a cell, because they don't want to form a cell, they're just there. They're just hanging around, these molecules. So he wrote about the impossibility of a cell forming. I mean, it's almost like, I've kind of thought about is I'm in the woods a lot. I would think that as many miles as I've traveled in the woods, I would find maybe at least 2 or 3 logs that might be stacked up like a log house, like just the beginning of a log house, where nature would just form its own log house by trees falling down. The closest thing I've ever found to that was where a lightning bolt hit a tamarack snag, and it almost looked like a 2x4 was just cut out of this tamarack board and fell over. And I remember looked at it, and it was like, yeah, that's pretty close to the measurement of a 2x4, but it had a really bad twist to it. And I thought, that's the closest I've ever seen to nature making something on its own. But there's some really good information now, especially with the internet. We can get really good information out there. We can also get really bad information. So when we're looking on the internet, and that's kind of where I went to, is to try to find, just recently, we didn't have internet when I was in school, we got internet now. So recently, I went to the internet to see if I could find more information about the beginning of life. And I stumbled onto a Dr. James Tour. He's a professor of chemistry of materials and science and nanoengineering. He's a professor of computer science at Rice University, Nobel Peace Prize winner. He's got over 700 patents, many papers he's written. It's just mind-boggling the things that he's done with molecules. And if you ever get a chance, look him up. We're gonna see like a 30-minute video that he put out there about the beginning of life. Like I said, I can't talk for an hour, so I got support. So we're gonna watch that video and see what this professor has to say about the beginning of life. So yeah, go ahead and start that for me. James Tour.
I'm a synthetic organic chemist. Origin of life is purely synthetic organic chemistry. There's no way around it. I'm perfectly situated to be commenting on this, to be critiquing the origin of life research. It is abiological. It is before biology takes over. This is purely synthetic organic chemistry. And making these compounds is very simple. 4 classes of compounds. You have to make them from what's available on a presumed prebiotic earth. And so the chemistry is not hard for a synthetic organic chemist to follow, and any trained synthetic organic chemist can follow me on this. And I've never seen a synthetic organic chemist disagree with me on this. In fact, the people that might disagree with me are biologists because they've never made anything. The only thing they may have made is they buy a kit and they make it, which is made by chemists, but they've never made anything ab initio. And so it's the synthetic chemist that can critique origin of life research better than anyone else. So go ahead, ask your synthetic chemist friends to listen to what I have to say. If they have anywhere a master's degree or beyond in synthetic organic chemistry, have them critique what I say. We do not know how to build even a simple bacterium. The simplest bacterium with its 256 protein coding genes, we have no idea how to build it. First of all, we don't know how to build the molecules, the 4 classes of molecules that are needed for it. We don't know how to, even if we had those 4 classes of molecules, assemble them even into the simplest of bacteriums. We don't know how to do that. One can do that with the technologies we have today. We can make technologies, but we can't even make the simplest bacterium. Anybody who would say something contrary does not know what they are talking about. Show me the demonstration. Nobody has ever done it. And it's not because of lack of effort. It's not because of lack of will. First of all, they haven't been able to get the molecules to do this. And if they could make the molecules, even if we were to give them the molecules, they wouldn't have the information. There would be no inherent information in the DNA. But even if we gave them the DNA in the structure that they wanted, they wouldn't know how to put all the components together because of the sophistication within a cell. The interactomes, meaning that the interacting connectivity between the molecules, the van der Waals interactions, all of these have to be in the right place and in the right order for a cell to function. We don't even know how to define life, let alone knowing how to spark it to begin. When one looks at a typical textbook, one will see some prehistoric pond and molecules, and those molecules coming together and forming a cell, and those cells coming together and some slithering creature coming out of this pond. That is fallacious. There is no truth in that. We don't even know how to make the molecules. We are lost on how to do this. We can't even make the basic building blocks. But even if we could, from prebiotic type environment to make these, with all the intellect that we put into this, even if we could make them, we have no idea how to assemble them. You say, well, we can make the liposome, the cell membrane. We cannot. There's over 40,000 lipids have been identified in cell membranes. You want to take some simple ones? It's not just individual lipid membranes. You have to have the inside and the outside of the membrane have to be different. You have to have this huge array of proteins, that transmembrane proteins, and you have to have carbohydrates on the surface as identifiers. Even in the simplest bacterium, we have no idea how to put the structure together. It's not there. So not only do we not know how to make the basic components, we do not know how to build the structure even if we were given the basic components. So the Gedanken experiment is this: even if I gave you all the components, even if I gave you all the amino acids, all the protein structures from those amino acids that you wanted, all the lipids in the purity that you wanted, the DNA, the RNA, even in the sequence that you wanted, so I'm even giving you the code. And so now I say, and all the nucleic acids, can you now assemble a cell here in your individual bodies, not in your individual laboratories, not in a prebiotic cesspool, but in your nice laboratory? And the answer is a resounding no. And if anybody claims otherwise, they do not know this area. This is how far the misunderstanding has gone. Even science professors, even biology professors, think that there is a near building of life, that we understand all the ways to build life. We do not. Not only have none of the molecules been made ab initio under prebiotic-like conditions to make the homochiral molecules that are made. Remember, we need 4 classes of molecules. We need the nucleic acids, and then the homochiral systems that for the amino acids, which then need to be built up into protein structures. We need the carbohydrates, which have to be built up into the polycarbohydrate structures. And then we need the lipids, which also are chiral. All of these we need in homochiral form. We don't know how to do this in any prebiotic type scenario at all. These have not been made. And then to assemble these into a cell, it's never been done. So there's a gross misunderstanding. And this misunderstanding has come because of the projections of those who work in the area of origin of life. They do one little thing and then they extrapolate it, and then they work with the press to ramp it up even more, and they project as if they really know it. And so the lay person reads this and says, you see, scientists understand. And then it's not just the lay person. Scientists think that other scientists understand all of this, but they do not. There's a great negative outcome of this beyond just leading the audience, leading the general public astray. What happens ultimately is you end up with 100 million people in the United States that no longer believe this. And then you have the scientific elite saying, why is there 100 million people that don't buy into this? And that distrust will go beyond just that particular topic. It will extend into other topics. And so it yields a distrust of science. Some people argue that since there's been hundreds of millions of years available, the probability that there's the chance that these things could happen in hundreds of millions of years. But that's not true. Time actually can be an enemy when it comes to organic synthesis. Prebiotic synthesis is before biology. So one has to make chemicals. Many of the chemicals that need to be made for life are kinetic products, meaning that they're not the most thermodynamically stable form. For example, carbohydrates, which is the main class of compounds. These are the units that hook together DNA. These are the units that have identifying aspects on cell structure. These are the units that the cell is going to need for the energy of life. Carbohydrates are kinetic products, meaning that if they should form, they would decompose. They decompose over time. In relatively short amounts of time, they decompose. The very reactions that make them, unless somebody is there to pull them out, to fish them out, to stop the process and to put them in a bottle under inert conditions in a freezer, and not just one, there's many different types you have to do this, they end up going through a process of what's referred to as caramelization, meaning that they polymerize. They polymerize. The very aldol reactions that were used to make them just continue. And you get polyaldols, you get polycondensation reactions, and they caramelize. Or they undergo, with formaldehyde, which is a presumed prebiotic chemical, they undergo rapid Cannizzaro reactions. So the aldehyde is oxidized to formic acid, and this nice carbohydrate that you made has just been reduced. So the aldehyde from the carbohydrate has gone back to an alcohol. So there's competing reactions. So time does not solve the issue. The other problem is if you had 400 million years to get to a certain point in a synthesis of a particular class of compounds, now you run out of material. Anytime you do synthesis, you run out of material, even when you've optimized the yields, and you got to go back to the beginning. Well, say it took you 400 million years to get to a certain point on a synthesis. Now you have to go back and make more. But how do you go back and make more? Because nature never kept a laboratory notebook. Doesn't know how to go back. Never kept a record. So even if it could make more, it doesn't know how to. So it's got to start all over again somehow. But it doesn't know how to start over again. It doesn't know why to start over again because it doesn't know what it's going toward. So if you look at it, people have been trying for a long time. If we just take Miller-Urey as the first example, where Miller and Urey took some basic chemicals that are presumed on a prebiotic earth, hydrogen cyanide, formaldehyde, and CO2, and they put those across a high voltage, simulating lightning, you can get some racemic amino acids out of those. But those racemic amino acids were racemic. Okay, that was in 1952. That was 2/3 of a century ago. What has happened in 2/3 of a century since Miller-Urey in other fields? Well, we've had human space flight. We have satellite connectivity. We have the internet. We have the entire silicon era of microchips, and we have computer technology. We have all of this. In the same 66 years, 2/3 of a century, we are still exactly where Miller and Urey were. We make a barrage of stereo-scrambled chemicals, nowhere close to even knowing how to make them and hook them together. They got to get hooked together in the proper order. We are clueless on this, clueless, because time doesn't solve this. Even with all our ingenuity, time is not going to solve the problem. You let these chemicals that have been made, you let them sit around, even for months, and you can look even in the origin of life researchers themselves. When they've let these go for weeks, they show the degradation of these in a period of weeks. Weeks is the twinkling of an eye when it comes to prebiotic timescales. The chemicals decompose. The environment for the chemicals, environment rich in ammonia, is going to turn carbonyls into imines. This is going to cause further destruction. The ammonia environment itself is quite basic. You're going to have extended aldol reactions coming on. So to think that the molecules could be made and sit there waiting for other molecules to come in, it doesn't happen. Organic chemistry doesn't work that way. Any student that is lazy enough to set up reactions and like to go home for the weekend without working them up pays the price for that, with a depressed yield generally. As soon as the reactions are done, or as soon as what you want is the optimized yield, you have to stop that reaction, get it away from the starting materials, or else what happens is it goes on to polymerized product. Especially when you're making kinetic products, which is not the thermodynamically most stable product, which is exactly what you get in many of the chemicals that are needed for life. So time is actually the enemy. There have been many people that have tried in origin of life research to make the chemical building blocks for life. The vast majority of the chemical building blocks are chiral, which means that they have a non-superimposable mirror image, just like our hands. The left hand and the right hand are non-superimposable mirror images. They're mirror images, but they can't be superimposed, and that's why a left-handed glove doesn't fit on the right hand. The vast majority of biological molecules are handed like that. To make them handed is difficult. We know how to do that in synthetic chemistry. It's never easy. Using prebiotic environment, it's never been successful. Some have said, well, this could happen on a chiral crystal. One can get small enhancements, but not nearly what you need, and it's never been demonstrated, even with all the intellect that people have put behind trying to do this with chiral crystals and chiral layered environments and chiral clay environments. The chemicals that are needed for life are more than just carbon and water. The structures that are needed. One needs the amino acids. The amino acids then have to hook together to form proteins. It's not easy to get amino acids to hook together. One can get very small amounts if you just add a catalyst to it, but the yields are extremely low. There are many activation steps that are needed to get this efficiently. In nature, in biology, once you have life, this is all done with nature's little nanomachines called enzymes. But what we're talking about is prebiotic, long before enzymes themselves are made, and the enzymes themselves are made out of the amino acids and proteins. Then after we have the amino acids, we've got to have the carbohydrates. The carbohydrates are another class of molecules. And then you have to hook the carbohydrates together. The carbohydrate hooking together pattern is extremely complex. Just the carbohydrate, the simple carbohydrate, D-mannose. If you just make 6 units of that D-mannose, that D-mannose can be hooked together in over 1 trillion different combinations, depending on how they're branched and what the constitution is of the primary linkage point. Over 12 trillion combinations, and only one works. Only one will work. How do you get that? Now, you also have to have the lipids. The lipids have to have 2 tails, not 1. If you have the monoacyl lipid, that destabilizes any lipid bilayer. And these also have chiral centers. Again, how is that done in a prebiotic system? Nobody knows. And then you have to have the nucleic acids. So you have to have the nucleobases, and those nucleobases have to somehow hook very cleanly to a carbohydrate that had to independently be made, and then you have your nucleotide that then had with a phosphate group on there that then has to hook together. Again, that's only done by enzymes. We don't know how to do that cleanly before there's enzymes. All of those pieces we don't know how to make, let alone hook together. Some might suggest that there are certain laws that we don't yet know, undefined laws, that would dictate the origin of first life. It's very hard to comment on something that we don't know anything about. However, one would have to have law upon law upon law upon law, one after another, to make the requisite molecules needed for life, and then to have those requisite molecules assembled. Because even if one had the molecules, which is very hard to do, how do you do the assembly? We don't know how to do that. Now, if there's some law to do this, remember, just the interactome, just the protein-protein interactions within a single yeast cell, the 3,000 proteins, it's 10 to the 79 billion power on the possible combinations of just the interactome. How do you get those to order? Of course, there is a large cascade of arrays that can get these to order, but that always has life spawning life. We don't dehydrate cells and get them to work together again. Cells will split and pass that information along to other cells. We don't know how to spark these things. And it can't happen from a single unknown law. You'd have to have unknown law upon unknown law upon unknown law. It takes a lot of faith to do that. I'm not sure I have that level of faith. But if they do, good for them. Every year we understand more about the complexity, so we are more befuddled now than we were in 1952. Because we found that this is not just a massive protoplasm, highly complex environment. So when a cell wants to move material from point A to point B, it's a factory. You go to a factory, what do you see? You see these overhead carriers carrying machined parts from point A to point B. That's exactly what happens in a cell. You want to carry material from point A to point B, a microtubule will form between point A and point B. And then materials will transfer across that. But then what happens is that microtubule then dissolves and then is reconstructed somewhere else where you need other material transferred between any other 2 points. Why does a cell go through this? Because if it kept all of those microtubules in place, it would become too rigid and it couldn't function, and it would run out of the building blocks to build more microtubules. So it has the ability to morph its structure of its factory on the fly, something we don't even know how to do. The complexity of this is so grand. And the complexity becomes more and greater every day when we start understanding the complexity of the interactome, which is not merely protein-protein. You have protein-DNA interactions, the interactomes between these, the van der Waals interactions between these the non-covalent, bonds, just the way these two interact. And information is passed through these non-covalent interactions. Information is passed through something that physicists call virtual photons. The complexity is so great, and it gets harder every year. So in many ways, we're getting further from understanding origin of life every year once we understand the greater complexity of the cell. So if one wants to use a probability argument to say that there must be billions of inhabitable planets in our universe, or even going with string theory and suggesting that there are multiverses, so there's lots of universes like ours that go beyond even our universe, the numbers are still difficult. So remember, just the protein interactions in a single yeast cell are 10 to the 79 billion combinations. The number of elemental particles in the universe is 10 to the 90. We got 10 to the 90 elemental particles in our universe, let alone planets. Particles in our universe the estimate is 10 to the 90. I'm talking, so that's a 1 with 90 zeros after it. Just the interactome combinations of just protein-protein in a single yeast cell is 10 to the 79 billion. That's a 1, not with 90 zeros, but a 1 with 79 billion zeros after it. These are the types of numbers we're talking about. It's hard to fathom. Then, in addition to just those 3,000 proteins that are there in that single yeast cell, you still need all the DNA, all the RNA. You need to have all the carbohydrates. Remember, the carbohydrates have all their own definition order by the way they're hooked up. Remember, just D-mannose, you can put more information in the carbohydrates that are on a cell surface than you store in DNA and RNA combined. And that information has to come from an original DNA template plus a series of other enzyme cascades. All of this is in that cell in addition to those interactomes. It's very complex. Origin of life is a complex problem, and it's hard to throw this at the feet of just large numbers.
Okay, well, if that didn't make your brain sweat, that was literally the simplest video I could find that he made. So if you didn't understand that, I mean, you can go on to YouTube and look at a lot of the others, and some really interesting information he has out there. But he has quite a testimony. He was raised Jewish. So he said, as far as he knew, they went to temple once a year, and that was what they had to do, and they're good to go. And so when he got to college, he happened to be in the laundry room cleaning his clothes, and there was a football player there, and they got to talking, and he asked the football player, well, when you graduate, you plan on going to professional football. He said, oh, no, I'm not near good enough to do professional. And so Dr. Tur asked him, what are your plans? And he said, I plan on being a missionary. He had never heard of a missionary. And he said, what's that? And he explained to him, what a missionary does, and began to witness to Dr. Tur about Jesus. And had a few different conversations over the few months. And so James Tur began to kind of investigate this Jesus in the Bible. And he said Jesus just met him at the door and in his face and became Christian. And sometime later, he happened to run into that same football player, and the football player said, hey, did you accept Christ? And Dr. Tur said, yeah, I did. And he said, I thought you did. You've been smiling ever since. He said, you never smiled before. And he said, yeah, I noticed that I'm a lot happier now, a lot more joy in my life. One thing he says in his videos is he doesn't believe in an intelligent creator. And that's something I always thought. It took an intelligent creator to build our world here. But he said to call God intelligent isn't good enough, because if he's intelligent, that limits him to what he knows. He says he's an all-knowing creator, not intelligent. Something that I've done in my Sunday school class about a year ago, I began to kind of think about this, and we actually did a study. I think took about 6 to 8 weeks, and we studied the historical facts, the archaeological facts, human nature, and the science. I really couldn't find anything to follow to try to present to my class, so I had to make things up and do my own research to present to my class. But I think that they really got a lot out of it. At the end, I asked the kids in my class, I said, what do you think of now about, what you believe in the Bible? And all of them said, well, this really gives me a lot more understanding of what I believe, why I believe what I believe. So I think it's really important that we do that with our youth. And the funny thing was, I asked them. It seems like every one of them has the same answer. I said, "Well, what of all the study we did? What was the one thing that made you really think, or to be sure that the Bible is real?" Well, if you go back into Old Testament, beginning of Scripture, Yahweh was mentioned, right? Archaeologists recently uncovered a tomb, and in the tomb there was, jewelry in there, and one of the jewelry that they found was common thing they find is like a necklace that they make and they will put on the body. And it's usually a string of leather with some kind of jewelry, beads or something like that on the, something that person may have really enjoyed or liked in their lifetime. So on this one they found was actually a strip of metal about 10 inches long and about an inch wide. And it was rolled up around this leather. And of course, the leather was gone, but they assumed it had to have leather. They went through this to make a necklace out of it. When they unrolled it, and literally it took them a year and a half to unroll this without damaging it. So when they got it unrolled, it read Yahweh. That dated back 1500 BC. That's pretty significant. Find an archaeological dig that goes back to 1500 years and mentions God. It wasn't like the Bible was dreamed up 2,000 years ago and somebody, a group of people just wrote it up. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found those interesting. And a lot of the other things, the pools, there were some pools that have been recently discovered that are actually mentioned in the New Testament. They kind of questioned about these pools because they'd never found them. Well, just in the last couple of years, they found these pools that the New Testament describes these pools to a T. And but everything we looked at, that was the one thing that just about every student thought was really significant. Well, I am out of time. Well, not out of time. I'm out of information. So we're going to close with a word of prayer. Unless anybody would like to have a comment, don't ask me any questions, but if you have any comments, you're welcome to it. Yeah, explain everything he said. Well, like he said at the beginning, unless you have a master's degree, or beyond, then, I wish he would just dumb it down for the common layperson to understand a lot of what they're saying. But maybe to dumb it down, it would take hours and hours and hours to explain something that takes him 5 minutes to cover. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really kind of surprising, growing up in a Christian home and then talking to people about Christ and what they don't know. I mean, they don't know anything in the Bible. I mean, they barely know the birth of Christ. They didn't know that because it's Christmas, right? And Easter, they don't really have a comprehension of that. So many people are just like, yeah, I'm good. I try to be good. I hope that's good enough. I've been with Gary, Gary is a bold witness, and I've been with Gary when he's witnessed to people, and it's usually, yeah, I believe that I'm good, and they don't understand when we say there's a God that loves you and wants a relationship with you. So but I think you're right. I mean, it's you have to speak what you believe. You can't expect people to come to Christ just because they see you acting or going to church on a regular basis. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. What's they saying? I would be an atheist, but I don't have enough faith. Okay, we'll close in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time we can come together and learn more about you and your incredible creation that you've made here on earth, and the love you have for us, that you would even send your own Son to die for us and offer the salvation we can freely get. Lord, just ask that you would be with us, guide and protect us in everything we do and say, and we ask that we would be a bold witness for you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.